Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us live for Legal Services of Eastern Missouri's presentation on the rights of children experiencing homelessness. Co-hosting this presentation are the St. Louis MHB and the Missouri Foundation for Health. My name is Maggie Lamore, and I am the Program Director of the Children's Legal Alliance at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. I will be the moderator for today's presentation. I am joined by today's presenter, Amanda Schneider, the Managing Attorney of the Education Justice Program at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. Michelle Weltman, Staff Attorney with the Children's Legal Alliance, Dan Underwood, the Managing Attorney of the Children's Legal Alliance, and Hopi Fink, a Staff Attorney with the Education Justice Program, will be monitoring the Facebook chat and responding to your comments and questions. Please note that our presenter cannot see your questions in the chat, but we will be answering questions at the end of the presentation if time permits. A recording of this presentation will be available on our Facebook page after the live stream ends. The video recording will also be available on the Legal Services of Eastern Missouri website, along with the slides from today's presentation. Please also note that this presentation is provided for informational purposes only and does not constitute specific legal advice. We are also unable to give specific legal advice in response to questions and comments in the chat. If you have specific questions about an educational issue or are interested in legal representation for an education problem, please contact our intake department at 314-534-4200 or fill out an online application on our website, www.lsem.org. Now I will turn the presentation over to Amanda Schneider.
Thanks, Maggie. So today I'll be giving an overview of the rights of children experiencing homelessness, especially in the time of COVID-19 school closures and remote learning. Next slide. Next slide. And here's an agenda for today's presentation. Maggie, next slide. So we'll be giving just a brief overview of Legal Services of Eastern Missouri and the work of our two education programs here. And then we'll be touching base briefly on definitions of homelessness under McKinney-Vento and some basic know your rights information. And then we'll plan on discussing some things to be mindful of in light of COVID-19 school closures. And hopefully we'll have some time for question and answer. So who we are Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. We provide free civil legal assistance in 21 counties of Eastern Missouri, including in the area of family law, public benefits like food stamps, TANF, Medicaid, education, of course, immigration, consumer, housing, small business development, and also unemployment compensation. And to request assistance, you can contact us by phone, 314-534-4200, or go to our website at lsem.org. And our Education Justice Program is a division of Legal Services of Eastern Missouri that targets the root causes of education inequity in Missouri. And we use a racial justice lens and a community lawyering model to advance systemic change. And we're collaborating today with our Children's Legal Alliance, also a division within Legal Services that provides free legal representation to children with educational legal needs in the St. Louis area. So now let's touch on some McKinney-Vento definitions. So what is McKinney-Vento? So McKinney-Vento is short for the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which is a federal law designed to remove barriers to education created by homelessness. It has the goal of increasing the enrollment, attendance, success of children and youth experiencing homelessness. It's a law that ensures that homeless children and youth have immediate and equal access to a public education, no matter where they reside. And the actual definitions of homelessness under McKinney-Vento include children or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And the law itself does not define these terms, so we defer to dictionary definitions. Fixed means securely placed or fastened, not subject to change or fluctuation. Regular means standard. A recurring residence is one that is used on a regular or nightly basis. And adequate, sufficient for a specific requirement, lawfully and reasonably sufficient, and it meets those physical and psychological needs. So any situation that lacks even one of these three variables can be a homelessness situation under McKinney-Vento. And note that unaccompanied youth not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, whether they were forced out of their parents' home or they ran away, and they meet this definition of lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, means that the child could be also homeless under McKinney-Vento. The law itself also sets out specific examples of McKinney-Vento situations. So situations in which children living in these situations meet the definition of homelessness under McKinney-Vento. And they include children who share housing due to the loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, children who live in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or campgrounds due to no other options, children who live in substandard housing, and that analysis of whether or not a housing situation is substandard really depends on community standards. So really looking at that housing to determine if it meets housing codes is important. But it may include situations in which the housing lacks a fundamental utility like water or electricity or heat, to name a few examples. Children who are living in emergency shelters or transitional housing, or those who are abandoned in hospitals, and children living in a public or private place not designated for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation may also qualify as homeless under McKinney-Vento, and children living in cars, parks, abandoned buildings, public spaces, or bus stations, or a similar setting. But note that that list is not exhaustive, and really it goes back to looking at, is the current living situation of the child fixed, regular, and adequate? So now we're going to move to touching base on just basics under McKinney-Vento, some know your rights principles. Next slide. So the responsibilities of schools generally fit under one of these three categories, I would say. So schools must ensure immediate enrollment and setup of transportation without delay. And schools must ensure that children experiencing homelessness are entitled to equal access. And that means equal access to the same free appropriate public education, including a preschool education, as is provided to other children and youth. And in order to provide equal access, schools must remove all barriers that could result in a child that is experiencing homelessness missing out on learning opportunities. Schools must also review and revise policies and practices that may act as barriers. So enrollment, the definition of enrollment under McKinney-Vento means attending classes and participating fully in school activities. And that includes extracurricular activities, sports, summer school, and enrichment programs. In a time of COVID, it may mean accessing food, if there's a food distribution going on by the school, and tools necessary to access remote learning. Immediate enrollment means that schools must enroll the child immediately and set up transportation without delay. And that is even if the paperwork required for enrollment is unavailable, which is very common for families experiencing homelessness, and even if the child has missed an application or enrollment deadline. So in the time of COVID, this means that even if the family has missed a deadline to choose whether or not they want to enroll immediately and do in person or choose the remote option. And each school district must have a board designated homeless liaison, and the family should try to connect with that homeless liaison to enroll their child in school. Next slide. So children experiencing homelessness may present for immediate enrollment at either the school of origin or the district or the school in the district in which they lie their head at night. So the presumption for a child experiencing homelessness is that the presumption is that they should attend that school of origin, and that is keeping in mind the importance of educational stability. The school, but the determination should be a best interest determination, which is a student-centered approach, and priority should be given to the parent or the youth as to which school they would like their child to attend. Other student-centered factors could be the distance of a commute and its impact on the student's education, personal safety, a student's need for specialized instruction, the length of an anticipated stay at a temporary shelter or temporary location, and the time remaining in the school year. But that list is not exhaustive either. Next slide. And schools must provide transportation to and from school upon request and arrange it without delay. And there's a variety of transportation options for families, such as school buses. Some districts do use school buses and do different routes in order to ensure that children experiencing homelessness get on a school bus. Some schools do use taxi cabs or a similar mode of transportation for students. Public transportation could possibly be an option if the adult can ride that public transportation with the child, for example. Another option could be mileage reimbursement for parents when it's appropriate. Next slide. In dispute resolution, that is the process by which if the school disagrees with the school of best interest or disagrees with whether or not the child is even eligible for McKinney-Vento services, dispute resolution must be provided, and the school's homeless liaison must carry out that dispute resolution as quickly as possible. And during the entirety of the dispute, the district is required to immediately enroll the child in the preferred school, allow that child to fully participate in school activities, and provide the student with transportation. Next slide. Now we're going to turn to what's happening, especially in light of COVID-19, pertaining to McKinney-Vento. So we do know that because of everything related to COVID, businesses closing, high rates of unemployment, there have been significant increases in non-payment of rent and other related situations. For example, we know in the city of St. Louis, the sheriff was set to serve 59 evictions, process 59 evictions between July 7th and August 7th. But the presiding judge did ask the sheriff to temporarily stop those evictions in order to ensure that applications for rental or mortgage assistance will be processed first. We know the same, though, is happening all over the state and in the county as well. Local courts may have the authority to stay evictions, but we know in light of the numbers that many more children will qualify as McKinney-Vento eligible this fall and in the coming year. Next slide. And the responsibilities of schools under McKinney-Vento are still fully in effect, but it just may change the way in which schools provide services, and it may look different. But schools' responsibilities to eligible children remain the same. Schools must ensure that their enrollment systems are fully accessible or consider alternative ways to reach families. One example could be through any food distribution that's going on. Perhaps a mailer or a flyer could be included with that. But schools must ensure that eligible children are identified and that they are given equal access to the other services being provided to the children in the district, whether that is providing food service, or required technology, eligible children must receive the same access to those services and any other necessary services, really to remove those barriers to continued enrollment and retention. Next slide. So it's really important during this time that homeless liaisons consider how they're communicating with students and parents and children experiencing homelessness. Liaisons should stay in contact via regular check-ins, and they may need to consider alternative ways, again, to communicate with these families. I think the key really to all of this is ensuring that appropriate training of homeless liaisons is being conducted. So with that, we'll move to if there are any questions. I think we do include some resources for folks, which will also, I believe, be dropping in the chat. But these resources are also some COVID-19 resources, so very specific to the issues that COVID-19 has been presenting to our community, and some tools for folks to use and consider. We also include our Education Justice Program hotline as well, for families who are experiencing any difficulties with enrolling in schools. And I think we're ready to move on to some questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Our first question, if schools require masks or other safety equipment for all students, do schools need to ensure that students experiencing homelessness have access to masks and other safety equipment?
Yes. So the McKinney-Vento Act, as we discussed, requires school districts to remove barriers to enrollment and retention. And we said earlier, enrollment is defined as attending classes and participating fully in school activities. So if masks are required, for example, for students to attend classes or to participate fully in school activities, schools must address that barrier for students experiencing homelessness.
Moving on to our next question. Many school districts are limiting the number of students riding buses when schools go back in person in order to promote social distancing. Does this affect a district's obligation to provide transportation to students experiencing homelessness?
So no, these measures should not affect a school district's obligation to provide transportation. I mean, it may affect what that transportation looks like, and schools may have to consider other options, such as providing public bus transportation vouchers or passes, or setting up cab or other transportation or mileage reimbursement. So all options, possibilities that I described earlier, but the legal provision still applies if there's in-person learning going on and school buildings are open.
Next question. We know many districts in the St. Louis area are going to begin the school year virtually and not in person. Even with school being virtual, will homeless liaisons be available for families to communicate with them in order to present as homeless for enrollment?
Right, so McKinney-Vento is still fully in effect, and homeless liaisons should be and are still responsible for ensuring the identification, the enrollment, and the connection to services for children experiencing homelessness and their families. So this again may look different in the time of COVID. So it may mean that any identification of homeless students includes thinking outside of the box and thinking about if the online enrollment process is not accessible to families, what are alternatives to that? For example, one idea I heard of recently is making sure that the eviction courts share information about McKinney-Vento when the families are being evicted, which is one idea, but also again, utilizing the food distribution processes and making sure that there are flyers talking about a student's rights, a child's rights to enroll under McKinney-Vento and how to go about doing that, who's the point of contact. Again, it's really, I think, about training and then training of personnel, not just the homeless liaison, really anyone who is coming into contact with families, whether it's teachers or frontline staff, to be trained on McKinney-Vento and all that it requires. And I would say other thoughts could be, other than engaging with the eviction courts, thinking about all of the community partners that our families are engaging with and making sure they all are aware of and know who to refer families to in the district and how to go about that process of enrolling. And that could include really any one of us that comes into contact with families, including legal services. But think about all those places where homeless families do lay their heads at night and where they're staying at.
Next question. If school districts provide meals, technology, work packets, and school supplies for pickup at specific school sites, and a student experiencing homelessness does not have transportation to pick up those necessary items, does the school have to provide transportation to the school site or deliver the items to the family?
And I would say the answer is yes to that. Again, schools have the responsibility to provide equal access to learning opportunities for all children experiencing homelessness under McKinney-Vento, and that includes removing barriers to enrollment and retention. That means accessing food in order to learn, picking up work packets, or accessing technology. The schools need to consider how to get those to families or to set up transportation for the families to get those items.
Last question. You mentioned previously that all school personnel should be trained in the requirements of McKinney-Vento. But why is it important for a family to ask for the homeless liaison when enrolling? Is that required, or is that something that's just a good idea?
So, right. So under McKinney-Vento, really children experiencing homelessness should not have to directly connect with any one person. All district staff, especially those who are enrolling students, should be trained on McKinney-Vento. However, if the family asks for the homeless liaison, they should know that they're connecting with someone who should be very knowledgeable about McKinney-Vento and be able to really help them not only access enrollment, but also any necessary supportive services, as well as if they do need to go through that dispute resolution process, advise them of that and help them through the process. But it should not be required that a family absolutely connect with that homeless liaison or even ask for that homeless liaison. All staff really in the district should be knowledgeable and should be able to point that family in the right direction. And importantly, I just want to note that the title homeless liaison may not be the title that every homeless liaison uses. They may refer to themselves as a homeless coordinator, or most recently, I think folks are moving more towards the title of students in transition coordinator or students in transition liaison. We know that the word homeless in and of itself can be stigmatizing, and as we learned today, is a much broader term. It really encapsulates so many different living situations that our families experience. They may not themselves identify as homeless, and so that may actually be a barrier in and of itself to the enrollment of children in school. So, schools are probably aware of this, but families may not know. So the bottom line is families don't need to know who exactly to ask for or to even ask for that homeless liaison specifically. All, school staff should be ready and responsive when children experiencing homelessness do come their way for enrollment in school.
We did have a couple of questions come in regarding online registration and technology. So with school being virtual, a lot of school registration has moved online. If a family does not have internet access or access to a computer in order to complete online registration, does the school district have a duty to assist the family with the online registration process? And then with respect to technology, does the district have the same duty to provide students experiencing homelessness with technology and access to internet that it does for all other students?
Okay, so yes, so certainly districts need to make sure as part of the online enrollment system that they are including questions to help families who identify as homeless go through those systems. But if a family, and a lot of the families we know have some barriers to technology, we need to ensure, schools need to ensure that those families can still access the enrollment process in some way. And that may look like not accessing the online system at all, but maybe going through the process by phone instead, or doing it in an alternative way. But yes, schools need to be responsive. And I think it's widely known that there is a digital divide and a gap in who has the technology and who doesn't. So certainly being mindful of students who may be in that situation needing an alternate way to enroll. But the homeless liaison should be available to help them through that process. And then the other question I think was just related to accessing remote technology, which I do believe we talked about earlier, but certainly children experiencing homelessness may be staying in a variety of situations. We talked about some of them, whether it's in a shelter or whether it's at a campground. They may not have those same tools, even access to an internet connection to be able to access remote learning. And I do believe in those situations when children are experiencing homelessness and are eligible students under McKinney-Vento, that schools need to think creatively about how to ensure that those barriers to learning are addressed. And if that means ensuring that these students are provided hotspots, for example, if they have no other way to access remote learning, or other related equipment that they are given that, and provided it in a way that is accessible to them.
All right, one more question in chat that is a practical question related to when to contact legal services. So at what point in the school year or the enrollment process should families contact legal services if their educational needs are not being met?
Well, certainly if a family has attempted to present as homeless to the homeless liaison or to the district, that could be a time to refer a family our way. But I would say we hear from families who are at a variety of different stages in the process. Again, mentioning how some families do not even identify as homeless, that sometimes means that families come to us and they're not able to enroll their child in school, but not understanding that they actually do fit under that definition of homelessness based on their current living situation. And sometimes we help families even understand that because of this broad definition under McKinney-Vento, they actually do qualify for those services. So I would say really at any point in time when there are any barriers in the enrollment process could be the right time to refer to our programs.
All right, Amanda, any last thoughts or tips for families before we sign off?
I would just say, know that you do have rights, and especially in this time of COVID-19, they didn't go out the window when COVID came into all of our lives and experiences. So hopefully, if anything can be taken away from this, I think that's understanding that, and that your children, if they're experiencing homelessness, have the right to be enrolled in school and receiving the same sets of services that children not experiencing homelessness are getting.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for your extremely informative presentation. And thank you again, audience, for joining us today for Legal Services of Eastern Missouri's presentation on the rights of children experiencing homelessness, co-sponsored by the St. Louis MHB and the Missouri Foundation for Health. A reminder that the recording of this video will be available on our Facebook page under videos after the live stream ends. And both the video recording and a copy of the slides from today's presentation will be available on our website. Please join us again on Thursday, August 13th at 2:00 p.m. for the next presentation in our Back to School series on special education, and again on Thursday, August 20th at 2 p.m. for our final Back to School presentation on school discipline. Thank you again for tuning in.